Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. Today, we're going to understand the Prioress's Tale from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, translated by Theodore Morrison. And this is the analysis by Jimmy. Hopefully, you read it with me. This is a very, very different than other tales, isn't it? We're reading together with our friend Chaucer. It mixes religion, brutality, in a very strange way. The prologue is like a prayer to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Wherefore, in praise, after my best endeavor of thee, and the white lily, Mary, the mother of Jesus, that in her hour brought thee to birth, and is a maid forever, a story shall I tell, though with no power to increase her honor. She, the unsoiled flower, whom in herself is honor, they are one, soul's blessing, and the root of mercy next to her son. And then she goes on, help me to tell it, the tale, to thy dignity. Isn't that interesting? So, if you're going to understand this tale, truly understand it, you're going to have to put aside your own religious beliefs. And you're going to have to understand a little bit about the church during medieval times. If you read The Partner's Tale with Jimmy, hopefully you did, you got a very different view, a different picture than what this prioress gives us about the church. Maybe. I think you did. So, what's on your blackboard? Hmm? John Locke was a philosopher who used the metaphor of a blackboard to describe the human mind at birth. He believed that a newborn's mind is like a piece of clean paper or a freshly erased blackboard, and it's free from pre existing knowledge or ideas. Locke argued that experiences and sensory input, you have five senses: seeing, sight, right? Hearing, tasting, smelling, feeling. Those inputs progressively fill our blank slates and they shape our thoughts, our understandings, and beliefs. This idea is called empiricism, which emphasizes the importance of experience in acquiring knowledge, as opposed to another form of philosophy, which suggests that you're born with knowledge of things like good and evil. So it's important to understand the blackboard concept when you read with Jimmy, because Jimmy likes to erase your blackboard when we dive into the story, because that makes sense, doesn't it? You get information through your senses, you formulate your beliefs. And so, what Jimmy has been showing you in every analysis that's on this website is to forget what you think you know, just forget it, and go into the story and learn what the characters and the narrators know, or at least they tell you what they know or what they think they know. And that's why you have the difference between first and third person narrators. The Canterbury Tales is complex because you have an anonymous narrator telling you what the prioress is telling you, and then the prioress is narrating her. It gets complicated, like life. So you read to learn how to lead your life by watching and experience how others lead theirs. So by logic, the way to eliminate preconceived ideas like church or anything else, erase your blackboard. Forget about what you think you know, what you believe you know, what you know you know. Just erase your blackboard, which is easier said than done. But it's essential if you're going to understand classic literature. And remember, on Jimmy's website, readingwithjimmy.com, we only read classical literature. You're not going to find dime novels on this website. So, like life, especially this tale, put aside your whatever on your blackboard. So, who is this prioress? Who is this woman narrating this? Well, to help us appreciate these tales, it's always a good idea, most of the time in my analysis, is to go back to the general prologue when the characters were introduced by the anonymous narrator. before we review the tale itself and what the prioress is telling us. Here's what the narrator said about the prioress, and then we'll tackle her tale. The prioress's name, by the way, was Madame Eglantine. Eglantine. Here's what the anonymous narrator of all the tales told us about her. There was a nun, a prioress, whose smile was gentle and full of guilelessness. That means she was sincere. By St. Loy was the worst oath she would say. What does that mean? Well, if you've been reading the tales with me, you find out there's a lot of swearing in here, right? There's a lot of bawdy talk in here, but not this nun. By St. Loy was the worst oath. She sang well at Mass in a becoming way, intoning through her nose the words divine, intonating like that. And she was known as Madame Eglantine. There's her name. She spoke good French, as taught by Stratford Bow. For the Parisian French, she did not know. So what's the difference between Parisian French and classical French? Well, if you know languages, a lot, because sometimes there's dialect. Sometimes, for example, if you're from Sicily like my wife and you speak Sicilian dialect, it's nothing like classical Italian. My wife had to actually go to school to learn Italian, the real Italian, even though she knew Italian. Also at the table, Madame Eglantine was schooled so well that, remember, this is the anonymous narrator telling us what he observed about this nun. From her lips, no morsel ever fell. In other words, she didn't eat like a pig. She wet her fingers lightly in the dish of sauce, for courtesy was her first wish. And every bite she did her skillful best to see that no drop fell upon her breast. She always wiped her upper lip so clean that in her cup was never to be seen a hint of grease. You know how sometimes you leave your lip stains on glass? In her cup was never to be seen a hint of grease when she had drunk her share. And she reached out for her meat with calmly air, not like a Viking. She was a great delight and always tried to imitate court ways and had her pride, both amiable, and gracious in her dealings. And for her charity and tender feelings, she melted at whatever was piteous. She would weep if she had but came upon a mouse caught in a trap. And if it were dead or bleeding, and some little dogs that she took pleasure feeding of roasted meat and milk or good wheat bread she had, but how she wept when she found the dog dead, or yelping from a blow that made it smart. So she was pretty set up. She'd cry at the slightest, right? And all was sympathy and loving heart. Neat was her whipple. What's a whipple? Look below real fast. It's a cloth covering worn over the head and around the neck and chin by women in the late medieval period by some nuns. So it's like a little, they used to call it in Polish, babushka or Russian. So her whipple in all its every pleat, her nose well formed, her eyes as gray as slate, and her mouth was very small and soft and red. Boy, the anonymous narrator is really a good observer, isn't he? And she had so wide a brow that I think her head was nearly a span abroad, for certainly she was not undergrown, as all men could see. What does that mean? She wore her cloak with dignity and charm. In other words, she's pretty, right? She wore her cloak with dignity and charm, and she had her rosary always about her arm. The small beads coral and the larger green. And from them hung a brooch of golden sheen. An A was inscribed beneath the crown it bore. And underneath that letter was Omnia Vincit Amor. Love conquers all. Huh. So this likely, the A refers to Amor Vincit Omnia, which translates to love conquers all. Is that divine love, you think, or is it human love? Some scholars suggest that's human love. She was more worldly. I don't think so. Remember, when you read with Jimmy, we go into the story, and there's no evidence that that's what she meant, this love conquers all, is human love. She was a nun, and nuns, subtitled, are always known as the brides of Christ, right? That's divine love. So let's conclude it was divine love. So the first person narrator inside the story described her with words. Remember, he's the anonymous narrator. Let's look at some of the words again. Gentle, full of guilelessness, sang at mass well, was schooled and spoke classical French. The narrator, the way he describes the way she eats, she was a delight. She imitated court ways, amiable, gracious, and she melted at was ever piteous. She had, she had sympathy for a trapped mouse or a dog that was beaten. He paints a picture of her. The anonymous narrator presents her as a lady. In medieval England, a lady was a noblewoman, while a nun was a woman who dedicated her life to religious service in a convent. There's nothing in the prologue to indicate the prioress is worldly. The anonymous narrator in his description actually admires her. Doesn't he? Do you feel that in the language that he used to describe her? He admires this nun. He certainly he doesn't feel any animosity towards her, right? In fact, he kind of likes her. So, how does this description of the prioress, Madame Eglantine, relate to her story she tells? Well, let's look at the story. Her tale is about a Christian town somewhere in Asia, imagine that, where a 7-year-old schoolboy learns to sing a hymn, Alma Redemptoris Mater, a Latin prayer to the Virgin Mary. This prayer is very important in understanding the story, whether you are Catholic or not. Remember, erase your blackboard. We're going into there, and this kid likes to sing this song. I gave you a link here that you can listen to the song. It's what they call a Gregorian chant. And if you're familiar with Catholicism, Gregorian chants were in the early medieval, sung by monks. And I encourage you to play that YouTube version of this kid's song. Right? Translated from the Latin, because he sang it in Latin. Remember, he was taught by his friend Latin, the words. Bear with me now and remember, erase your blackboard. Loving mother of the Redeemer. Who's that? That's Mary, who remains the open gate of heaven and the star of the sea. Help your falling people who strive to rise again. You, Mary, who gave birth to the wonder of nature, she bore Jesus, to your own holy creator, virgin before and after the Immaculate Conception, we'll talk about that in a minute, who received the Ave from Gabriel's mouth, have mercy on sinners. So it's a plea to Mary to help sinners, who are all of us. So it's a little prayer to Mary. Mary in Catholicism was the mother of Jesus, Immaculate Conception, believed by Catholics. Remember, erase your, well, Jimmy, I don't believe that. I just don't believe it. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm asking you to understand it. If you're going to understand the Prioress's Tale, you have to understand the nature of this song that the kid sings. You don't have to believe it. In fact, don't believe it. But for the purposes of understanding and appreciating this story, which is a complex story, you've got to understand what Mary was about. So she was, Immaculate Conception. She gave, birth to Jesus. She never had sexual relationships, which is a hard thing to believe, right? So most people don't believe it. And if you do believe it, if you are Catholic, it's a leap of faith. You have faith that it happened. Just like most religions, you have to have faith to believe in what the religion is telling you. We'll talk about faith some other time. So here's some notes. Alma is a nourishing, kind, Redemptoris Mater, mother of the Redeemer. The Star of the Sea is a traditional medieval metaphor. I gave you a couple of notes to try and understand it. And the Ave Maria is when Avia Gratia Plena, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed, that's the Hail Mary that Catholics sing when they say the rosary. Remember, the rosary is what's draped around the prioress's hand. She's always got the rosary there. And you could look up what the rosary is comprised of. Okay. Ave Maria, gratia plena. I forgot the Latin. I used to know this. The hymn that the boy sings reflects his devotion. So, we don't know why, but he loves the song. In the tale, the actual hymn is never sung. In other words, you never saw this in the tale. You never saw the translation, either in Latin or in English. Now, why is that? I looked it up for you to show you what it means, but why didn't the prioress put it in her tale? And I'm sure she knew what it was in Latin. She could have put it in the tale. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves as we dive into the analysis of this tale is, why is she telling us what she tells us, including why doesn't she tell us what she could tell us? So if she's saying this kid was reciting this prayer and singing this song, why didn't she recite the song? Well, I think we can safely conclude everyone she was talking to knew that song. Why? Because this is Catholicism. This is medieval England. Remember where they're going? To Canterbury, right? They're on a pilgrimage. Everyone knew this song. Well, Jimmy, I don't know this song. Well, you're not living in those times, and you may not be a Catholic, which is why I told you, suspend your belief. Erase your blackboard and pretend you are a Catholic, or at least learn what this means and ask yourself questions. She's not telling people what this song is, right? Because she could probably sing it. They probably can all sing it. So there's no need to tell her that in the tale. She just said they sang this song. It's like saying, I get no satisfaction, right? If I just said that's the song, some of you in the audience would be able to sing it word for word. Others would say, what's that? You see what I'm saying? So why didn't she put it in the tale? Is because everybody probably knew it. So the boy sings the chant. He learns the chant, and he's unaware of any danger that singing that chant may bring him. So ultimately, this becomes what I think is a symbol of his unwavering faith. He loves it. He loves the Mary. He has great, it's blind faith. Remember what I told you? You have to have faith in any religion to believe what you believe. So this kid has unwavering faith. It's blind faith, or at least so it seems. And anyway, the tale, the boy sings it everywhere, including as he walks through a Jewish quarter, a Jewish ghetto, they describe it, a Jewish neighborhood. So now imagine you're singing this song in a neighborhood, or you go into a neighborhood in your city or your town where you're singing, for example, a Polish song, and you go into a Italian neighborhood or whatever, right? It's a different culture. It's a different, right? So he doesn't understand the Latin. He just sings it. It's kind of like rote memory, right? He was too young to read and understand it fluently, so he asked an older schoolboy to teach him the hymn, which he did. And then the friend obliged. And like I said, this kid is kind of an innocent. So he just sings the song. According to her tale, some Jews who are portrayed as villainous, this is very important. Jews are not villainous. In this story, they're portrayed as villainous, just like nobody's a villain in life, right? You meet people on the street. How do you know who's a villain or not? They have to act villainous, right? In order to be seen as a villain. You don't know. You see someone as a stranger. How do you know they're good or bad? You don't. In any case, in her tale, the Jews are seen as villainous, and they become enraged at this kid singing this song. So they bribe a murderer to kill him. Now, note that the murderer to kill the kid is never described as Jewish until he actually kills the boy. This Jew seized on him, and he held him fast and slit his neck and threw his body in a pit. Oh my, how horrible. The Jew seized on him, held him fast, slit his neck, and threw his body in a pit. And if you read the story with Jimmy, you know that's a pit with entrails, right? We're going to talk about that. If we don't, bring it up to me in an email, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. So this reference is to Jews doing this to this kid is important to understanding the story. We're not saying Jews are like this. We're saying in this story, the Jews are the ones who killed this kid. I want to pause for a moment and put this in context. And you're going to be asking, Jimmy, why are you telling you all that? I thought you were analyzing the darn story. I am. But in order to understand and appreciate something, let's go on. Why am I telling you this? Well, to be appreciated, classical literature has to be understood. You're not going to understand it unless you really dig deep. Not only from the point of view of the prioress as the narrator, but as the anonymous narrator who's telling us what the prioress said and how she said it. This is very important. Remember the general prologue. She melted at whatever was piteous, and she wept as if she but came upon a mouse caught in a trap if it were dead or bleeding. She would actually cry over a mouse. Do you think she's crying when she just told the other pilgrims that the Jews seized on him, held him fast, and slit his neck? Even if she is crying, who talks like that? If you cry, why would she pick this tale of a kid getting his throat slit and being thrown in a pit of entrails if she weeps at a mouse dying? I want you to think about this. This is very, very important. It's a beautifully crafted contradiction because the prioress presents herself as tender-hearted. The narrator tells us she's like that, the way she eats, the way she conducts herself. But the tale is about murder and the execution of Jews. A miracle of a corpse, right? Singing after his throat is slit. So there's a sense of moral certainty and divine vengeance that's just. It's justice to kill people who kill me, right? I don't know. This is brutal stuff. Brutal. The tale depicts Jews as evil agents of Satan. Are they? I don't think so. And they're punished without complexity. Boom, they did it. Let's kill them. Boom. No feeling. But our analysis has to go deeper than that. What I'm asking you to think about, what I'm asking all of you to think about, does the way she tells the tale with such emotional excess or absence suggest that she is blind to her own cruelty? Or is it something else? Those words, they slit his throat and throws into the pit and entrails, right? Her whole language, excessive emotional, it's emotional, it's designed to, strive and bring out emotions. And yet she's almost emotionless. She's very dainty, right? She doesn't get excited. She cries because the poor mouse, the poor little mouse. So we're going to analyze it further and give you some context. Jews in medieval literature. Jews are often portrayed negatively in medieval European literature, including this tale. These portrayals are not isolated, but they're reflections of a widespread, pay attention, cultural, religious, and political prejudice that shaped the medieval world. That shapes our view today. It's your blackboard, silly, right? Whatever's on your blackboard, you think it's your belief, but it could be prejudice. You don't know. How do you know? How do you know? The concept of Jew was written in a certain way on a lot of blackboards in those days. But then this is true not only of Jew, but of any concept that you think you believe or you believe. And remember, what I'm asking you to do is suspend your beliefs temporarily. You can go back to believing whatever the hell you want. But I want you to understand for this story, put everything you believe aside. And let's talk about prejudice for a moment. One of the things that gets written on our blackboard is, in fact, prejudice. For example, I like a certain type of coffee. Why is that? Well, I've grown used to it. And if somebody comes in and challenges that, I'll defend it. Which is any prejudice is any preconceived opinion, judgment, or attitude that you have on your blackboard. And it could be positive or negative. I'm going to give you a perfect example. The sun goes around the earth. Okay? Think about this. This was written on medieval blackboards. The sun goes around the earth because the earth is the center of the universe. People believed that we circle the sun, which you observe even today. If you're looking at this, the sun is actually moving. And ladies and gentlemen, tell me this is not true. You can't tell if it's you moving or is the sun moving. So unless somebody rewrote your blackboard and said, no, you're wrong, you can basically say, no, we're going around the sun. I see it moving. We're not moving. I don't feel us moving, although you are. So starting with ancient Greek astronomers like Ptolemy, that belief that the earth being the center of the universe dominated thinking blackboards for 1,500 years. Copernicus came along in 1543 and said, no, there's an alternative to that. The earth is going around the sun. But it took more than a century for that theory to gain widespread acceptance, which came through Galileo. And Galileo, when he confirmed Copernicus's theory, was almost burned at the stake. You heretic. They thought he was a heretic because he was preaching something contrary to what was on our darn blackboards. Think about this. Think about this. You can't tell me you know for sure. You have to have faith that we're moving around the sun. Science tells us that. Well, how do you know science isn't lying to you? How do you know that? Think about what just happened with this COVID stuff. Tell me there was not a lot of lying going around that. You know what I'm saying? So, when Chaucer wrote his tales, the belief on the blackboards was that the earth was the center of the universe and everything else revolved around us. We are the center of the universe, which turned out to be absolutely false. Ladies and gentlemen, you are nothing in the universe. You're a speck. What do you mean, Jimmy? Think about it. But the people felt about other people, other religions, was also written on the blackboard. And one of the things that makes these tales of classical literature is how deep you can go in understanding other people and yourself. For example, anti-Semitism, right? Jew hatred is one of the longest forms of prejudice in Western civilization. It's been around a long time. And I'm bringing that up now because it's important to understand what this prioress is telling us. So antagonism towards Jews didn't start with the Christians. It started with the Greeks and the Romans. The Romans conquered most of the world, including Judea, which is where the Hebrews were, which are the Jews. And the Jews refused to worship the pagan gods, Zeus, everybody else, right? Jupiter. They had one God. They worshiped one God, right? And it's, well, Jimmy, I don't care about that. I'm not asking you to care about that. I'm asking you to understand it. If you're going to understand this story, you got to understand this. So the Jews did not worship what the Romans worshiped. They said, no, we believe in one God. So the Romans actually put up with that for a while. They put up with that for a while. But tensions flare eventually when you're not going to do what the state wants. Tensions flare. So the Romans began to see Jewish separatism a political defiance. So this fed stereotypes, etc. And they started, persecuting them, etc., and other things, right? Jews were restricted in many occupations. They were barred from land ownership. They were segregated into ghettos. Money lending was forbidden to Christians under usury laws, but that became one of the few things the Jewish could do. So they did it. They became money lenders. Oh God, how can you be a money lender? A pawnbroker. Holy mackerel. You see what I'm saying? Blood libel, which is accusing Jews of using the bloods of Christians in religious rituals, spread throughout Europe. See, rumors. And it spreads. Listen to this. England expelled all the Jews in 1290. They just threw them out of the country. France in 1306. Spain in 1492. That's a famous year, right? Finally, Christians believed Jesus was the Messiah, the coming who's going to free the people. The Jews did not, and they still do not believe Jesus is the Messiah. Now, I'm telling you this because I'm trying to teach you critical thinking. One of the things you're going to have to decide is the prioress's beliefs about Jewish people, about her own religion, about her love of Mary, the Mother of God. You're going to have to understand that and question that. You can't just accept it. Or are you that type of non-critical thinker that you just accept what everybody says, right? You read something on your blog or your feed or something that's posted on X, and oh, of course, that's got to be true. That's got to be true. Why? Well, because it's got to be. It's on my blackboard. No, 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 no. You might say, well, I'm not listening to this anymore, Jeremy. I'm out of here. Goodbye. Take it easy. Personally, I don't care. But if you're going to understand yourself and understand life and understand everything around you, or at least try to, because, ladies and gentlemen, life is complex. You better start looking critically at what you're looking at, what your senses are telling you. And I can think of no better way than classical literature to test your senses. We have a nun narrating this story, violent story, violent, about a kid who gets his throat slit for singing a song. So if you ever have to rely on others' opinions and the credibility of opinion, it's very important to understand if they're telling you the truth. So in all the tales, we have a first-person anonymous narrator telling us what a character narrates. Remember, it's the nun prioress, Madame Eglantine, telling us the story about the kid. But the anonymous narrator is telling us what she is telling us about the kid. So it's like a Xerox of a Xerox. You're 2 or 3 steps removed from the story itself. So someone could be lying, someone could be bending the truth, someone could be shaping what they want you to believe, which is the case of all the tales. They're all shaping the stories on what they expect you to believe. The miller was shaping something. The knight was shaping. They're all shaping things. So this is a story who was a boy who was murdered. He could not stop from singing on his way. The serpent, our first foe. What's that? What is that? It's the devil, right? The serpent from what? The book of Genesis, right? The guy who, the snake who comes out and says, and you got to read your Bible. There's lots of allusions in Chaucer. Well, I don't want to study the Bible, Jimmy. Well, you got to study it as literature. You don't have to believe it, but you got to study it. You got to study all classical literature, ladies and gentlemen, and the Bible is classical literature. So in this tale, the serpent who has his nest of hornets in Jews' hearts. What the hell does that mean? What the hell does that mean? The serpent, our first foe, the devil, has his nest of hornets in Jews' hearts. Do you believe that? Do you believe that? I, I, I'm just saying, I don't know how you could believe that. But for her story, you have to believe she's telling you this for a reason. She's telling the other pilgrims this, that in the hearts of Jews is the serpent. He puffed up and he said, "O Hebrew people, it is for the best that a mere boy, is it for the best that a boy, just as he likes, should tread your streets and bring contempt on your head and sing to such a purpose for a cause that is against the reverence of your laws?" So he's basically, she's saying the devil came there and said, can you listen to this kid? From this time on, the cursed Jews. Adjectives, pronouns, parts of speech are important. She doesn't just say the Jews. She says the cursed Jews. Are Jews cursed? Of course they're not. But in her tale, they are. This, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't figured it out yet, this woman is full of prejudice. Full of it. She's full of prejudice. She hates Jews. They conspired this innocent boy out of the world to chase, and a murderer for their purposes they hired, who in an alley had a secret place, and as he went by the kid, and as his child is paced, this Jew seized him, held him fast, slit his throat, threw his body in a pit. Holy mackerel. Holy mackerel. We're going to continue, but before that, let me do a little diversion and talk about the plot of this story, this tale. This is classical. Jimmy will bring up Aristotle every time before we plunge further into this woman's motive of telling us this tale. Plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song is what Aristotle says are the main elements of tragedy or novels or stories. Plot is the most important. Character is second. Plot is the representation of human action. So plots can be simple or complex. This is a complex plot, or is it a simple plot? What do you think? You can read the footnote, pause, put Jimmy on pause and read the footnote. If you haven't read it already, I try to use Aristotle in every analysis. It doesn't always work out. Well, according to Aristotle, a complex plot features a change of fortune, right? A simple plot involves a change of fortune without these elements, meaning the fate, without any significant, it just happens. So I think there's no recognition in here. There's no complexity in here. This is an execution based on prejudices of the time. It's a simple plot, straightforward, nothing to it. There's not a lot of deep character development like when you read Hamlet, right? This is a young, innocent kid who learns a song and gets killed by Jews who theoretically are infested with the demon, and they hate, right? And hatred. The plot, according to Aristotle, has a beginning, middle, and an end, and it does, right? There's an end, and you know what happens at the end? They killed all the Jews, right? So this tale, what I'm interested in more than anything else, right? Besides being a simple thing, is what does this tale tell us about the prioress, about Madame Eglantine? Because it's a simple plot: innocent child, evil deed. The tale never explains why the Jews hate the boy. What is the motivation for killing the boy? Is it that he sang the song? And we all know Satan entered their hearts, theoretically. And that's the clue. This is a story about hatred. Hatred, pure and simple. You know what hate is? Have you ever felt hatred? I mean, really felt it. I hate this hamburger. Not that kind of hatred. 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 Hate and love are very similar when you're under the spell of either of those emotions, right? Oh, I love you. Oh, I hate you. You see what I'm saying? So, unlike complex plot, the Jews in the story, they're not really people. They're just caricatures, stock villains, which brings out some of the prejudice. In Chaucer's time, anti-Semitism wasn't just common, it was in their blood, it was in their views, their hatred, unexplained, ingrained. That's what happens with that's what prejudice is. It's been written on your blackboard so deeply that you really, really, really think that it's true. It takes a lot to say, well, wait a minute, maybe it's not true. You understand what I'm saying? And that goes for good things and bad things. That I remember when Jimmy came home one time from college and said, "Mom, there is no God." And she started crying. "Jimmy, Jimmy, what did I send you to college for?" I said, "Mama, don't worry about it. I'm testing my faith. I'm testing. When you have something ingrained in your head, in your belief system, that's so ingrained that somebody comes along and challenges in it, and you have to be able to defend it to the point where you just say, well, excuse me, that's just what I believe. Well, why do you believe that? And why? And keep asking why, until you get to the bare bones of it and figure out why you believe that. You're going to find out you believe it because somebody wrote it on your blackboard, that you really haven't really thought it through. I guarantee it. Anyway, this is about what's written onto these blackboards and passed off as, quote, spiritual truth, which brings us back to the nun. She cries for a mouse, but she tells a tale of a brutally murdered boy. I mean, I can't think, I know there's a miracle involved. He had a pearl on his tongue. You take the pearl off, he goes to heaven, blah, blah, blah. And you know how it ends when you dealt with it, when you read it with me, right? So they are cursed, possessed, executed without hesitation. There's no hesitation in here. Boom, done. So it's about piety, but without reflection. It uses emotion not to illuminate, but to manipulate, just like the partner. If you read that tale with me, that's a manipulator. And I'm suggesting with respect, you don't have to believe me. Don't believe me. Email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, with your own interpretation. I get a lot of emails. But I'm suggesting that she's telling this story the way she tells it to manipulate these other pilgrims. And I'm going to tell you how I know that. So she's full of tears. Oh my God. Oh my God, right? Oh, but there's no forgiveness in this story, is there? There's no forgiveness. And if you study Jesus, if you study Catholicism, if you study most religions, forgiveness is part of most religions. Here's the tell. There's no recorded reaction from the other pilgrims to this prioress's tale. In other words, unlike other tales, like the Miller's Tale, which draws a rowdy response from the reeve, who says, "Oh, I'm going to get you," and he tells his own tale, or the Pardoner's Tale, which has a great explosive moral outburst by the host when, "I'm going to take," remember that? Remember that tale? There's no commentary, nothing, silence, crickets. What does that silence mean? Jimmy thinks it's the mask of piety and the heart of a tyrant. Yeah, that's what I think. She's introduced as delicate, courtly, sentimental. She weeps for a mouse, but she speaks French with elegance, and yet she chooses what? To tell a tale of extreme brutality. Right? Beneath that exterior beats the heart of a tyrant. Here's the chilling part. She may not even know she's doing this. Why? Because it's been ingrained on her blackboard. Because if she does, she's even more worse than I think she is. Well, Jimmy, she's just a character in a book. She's not real. Tell me you haven't met people like that who preach this and then do that. Tell me. Tell me you haven't met yet people who are like this, that are hypocrites, perhaps more than hypocrites. She's actually could be sinister. A person who feels righteous when she's delivering horror. She's giving them a horror picture. So the idea of silence being a reaction or brutality is not just plausible, it's a powerful insight. I want to make sure you understand that. It took me 4 days to get to this analysis. I just couldn't get there, ladies and gentlemen. I struggled because I don't want to give you a bunch of BS. I kept asking myself, what is it? Why is she telling me this? What does it mean? Why is she doing this? Why is she saying this? She's a nun. Couldn't she think of a more gentle story to tell? She's telling me that a kid is singing a song. And then this hatred of Jews is unmistakable in her narration. It's just unmistakable. How the hell do you hate that much? Well, you can understand if you're going to do that, you got to understand what hatred is. So you really have to hate that much in order to experience it, right? I don't know. Have you ever hated anything that much? That much? That much? I don't know. Imagine these pilgrims listening to all this. So the pilgrims say nothing because the only response is stillness. They can't, they're just silent, silence, right? What do you say? To question her would be to accuse her. And she's got the authority of religion behind her, right? She's a nun. Are they afraid of her? I don't know. She's a hypocrite, someone who pretends virtue but acts against it. You can't love Jesus. You can't love in this sense of Catholicism and practice such deep, deep hatred. I think she's morally corrupt. Well, I don't agree with you, Jimmy. I think what she, right? You can believe whatever you want. I'm just telling you this interpretation. She tells this tale like someone reciting a catechism. She wrestled with its meaning. She did not. She thinks she's feeling is truth. I don't know. That's where she becomes dangerous. She doesn't look inside herself. She just says it's okay to kill these Jews. They killed this kid, they killed the Jews, everything all right. Killing is good. No, man, you see, man gets used to everything, right? Dostoevsky taught us that in the Notes from Underground. Man gets used to everything, unfortunately. So the object of the game is not to get used to everything, but think things through. I want to give you a sidebar before I go. Sidebar. I want to explain what we've been doing in these interpretations because I get a lot of emails. I get a lot of emails regarding my method of analysis. You're not used to this. I get it. I was an English major. My degrees are in English, right? I wasn't used to this until I started really understanding what literature is all about. I don't analyze to impose an ideology. I don't give a crap about the author. Well, Jimmy, how can you say that? He's the writer, right? And I understand that. I applaud that. Let's hear it for, Chaucer. But I don't care about Chaucer. I look at the story as a world and I treat the characters as though they're real people. Well, Jimmy, then you're psychotic. No. Well, maybe I am, but I don't think so. Because reading classical literature, you could live 100 years, you'll never meet people like this, or you will. And if you do, then you'll have a reference point. There's a lot of different types of people out there. Anyway, this is not only legitimate to do what I'm doing, I believe, it's essential if literature is to speak to you about human beings. For example, Farewell to Arms was on this website. Hopefully you read it with me, right? Hopefully you read it with me. Lieutenant Henry by Hemingway. Lieutenant Henry shoots a deserter while he's a deserter himself. This is hypocrisy. It's not declared, but it's performed. He's a hypocrite. He's deserting the war, and he shoots a soldier for leaving him in the back. He doesn't need to explain it. His action tells you everything. It's the same thing with the prioress. She doesn't announce her hatred. She doesn't come out and say, I hate the Jews. She certainly tells you it, doesn't she? She reveals it through her story. It's devoid. It's devoid. There's no empathy here. Did you feel any empathy from her? Except for the mouse that got caught in the trap? Right? Even the kid who got his slit throat, do you feel empathy that she had for them, or did she just use that as an example to bring out the hatred she has, the hatred for Jews? People say more than they mean when they narrate a story. They say more than they mean when they talk to you. That's my guiding insight. What elevates this analysis beyond summary or academic formalism? Let's just talk about Chaucer and the Prioress Tale, right? You can go out on Google and pick up some analysis from some academic sitting in a schoolroom. This is real life, ladies and gentlemen. Classic literature is real life, as Dostoevsky said. We read it, and that doesn't make them any less real because they pick these weird people to write about. So read the story itself, extract the meaning from what is said, not who wrote it. What is done in the story, not who wrote it. That's true of every analysis you're going to read on this website. I'm not interested in Chaucer, Hemingway, or Dostoevsky, the epileptic. He was an epileptic, by the way. I'm interested in the world that they built. And that world, every novel, every play is a world. Forget your blackboard, go into the world with me. And I treat literature the way psychologists treat dreams. The question is not who wrote it. The question is, what does this show me about people and about myself? So this is why I hope Reading with Jimmy makes us original and enduring, these analyses. I want to take you inside the story play novel. I want you to listen carefully. You test the story's morality, not against modern values or your values, but against human nature, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, hasn't changed over the centuries. What do you mean, Jimmy? Look we got iPhones now. I'm talking about human nature. Technology changes, but they're still greedy. People are pride, lustful. There's courageous people. There's cowards. Human nature is human nature. We're evolving, right? You're not born caring. You got to learn to care. You're not born hating. You got to learn to hate. You learn these things. John Locke, right? So it's hard to study, hard to see, and hardest to see in ourselves. But classical literature, ladies and gentlemen, more than anything else, gives us clues on what we're looking for. You have to be curious, fearless, and a lifelong learner. You have to learn to see. Because the more you look, the more you see. And the more you see, the better you know where to look. Don't be afraid to see. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is the analysis of the Prioress Tale from Chaucer. A great tale, wasn't it? Thanks for being here. We're all the Canterbury tales that are on here that I decided that I should read. I can't read all of them, but they're here. There's other literature on here. Please enjoy yourself while you're on my website. The QR code will take you to my YouTube channel where we post those first and then they end up on the website. Thanks for coming. And remember, think and enjoy your life for heaven's sakes. And don't hate, please. Please. Well, Jimmy, I hate you. Okay. I hate you. Okay. Thanks. Sorry. Take it easy. Bye.